What a season for gardens. Good heat and moisture boosted the bounty. There's still a lot of color out there to enjoy, and there remains time to plant a favorite crop this fall. We have a recap of the 2015 growing season, some expert advice, and a showcase of landscaped beauty, all straight ahead on this fall harvest edition of Great Gardening.
Every tree has a moment when it shines.
That's called moneywort or creeping Jenny.
You can go in and do a rejuvenating pruning.
Forage and feed for our native pollinator population.
A garden really gives you peace of mind.
Hello, happy fall, and welcome to Great Gardening. I'm Pamela Fish, here for a full hour with our resident experts, Bob Olin, regional horticulturist and educator, and Tom Casper, president of Duluth Garden Flower Society and Duluth Community Garden Program board member. Well, autumn is upon us, and it's time to review the past growing season.
Well, I'll go first. Autumn might be upon us, but it sure feels warm out there.
It's very warm and sticky.
Yeah, it's been a warm
and it
summer.
has been. So what has that meant for the growing season?
Oh, I was going to say, if
right?
we delay the frost now, it'll be a near perfect growing season. So, geez, we have just a nice combination of a lot of good things happening this year.
Yeah, so we have a lot to talk about.
We
A
do.
lot of good news to talk about. And we have volunteers from the St. Louis County Master Gardeners Program here to answer phones. So please give them a call with your garden questions at 218-788-2844. You can call toll free 1-877-307-8762. You can even email your garden questions during this hour to askgardening@wdse.org. Okay, guys, so let's get to your observations about how the season went, at least so far. And I think if you had to sum it up, you'd say pretty darn good.
I'll take this year anytime. I mean, it's amazing. We came into the year early, hot and dry in the month of May, and all the projections were for continued drought. We had kind of a dry winter, and we're following these projections, and it started to rain. And then little sunshine and more rain. And then when we had about the third or fourth week of rain, the projections changed. They said it's no longer going to be a droughty year. We're going to have at least a normal year. And it turned out we had really quite a spectacular year in terms of rain and moisture, and a combination of that with sunlight for most areas.
That early and dry spring meant that you could get out there sooner and do some early planting.
Yeah, I can sum up my season in 3 words. I'm worn out. It's been great. I mean, a lot of time in the
When gardening is your profession,
yes.
it was a busy, busy season.
Yeah.
And there's so many people now, Tom. The tomato canning and freezing is just beginning. So,
and eating.
And eating. So you can't be worn out yet. The fun's still upon us.
I'm hoping for frost.
That's true. There is work to be done. But let's take a look back. There, as we said, early and dry spring, which meant we could get out and plant earlier.
Right. Soil temperatures warmed quickly, which gets seed out of the ground, so there really wasn't any problem with losing seed and the need to replant. Some crops actually came almost a little bit too early for us because we really aren't used to being able to get in the ground that early. But nonetheless, that got us off to a great start.
And we did have, it was sort of sporadic, but late in May we did have close to a killing frost too. So I know in a few pockets here and there were some folks that got set back a little bit, but certainly an early season. So,
but what it meant for the flowers, that great amount of rain and sun, they were gorgeous. The colors were gorgeous, weren't they?
Yeah, we really had great color set. Now I know we've got a broad viewing area and audience here, and I know some people really didn't experience all that abundant rainfall. So it all depended a little bit on where you are. I know on the range it was a little bit hot and dry for an extended period there, and then they're listening to this discussion and they're saying, my gosh, we didn't experience that. But overall, for the most part, we had this great growing, and it brought these wonderful colors, both in flowers and in vegetables. One of the downsides is we had this tremendous amount of early vegetation. Here you can see some examples of that. Everything was nearly perfect with rain and sun, consequently all this vegetative growth, and really for a vegetable plant to set fruit, there has to be a little bit of stress involved. And we got fruit set that was really just a little bit delayed because of all these ideal growing conditions earlier in the year.
Had exceptional root crops, at least it looked that way mid-season. And then, as you said, the abundant moisture led to also some issues, including the weed growth.
Yes, you know, it's real interesting because you get things in the ground, you get them planted, and you say, well, my work's done, and then it starts to rain, you say, great, I don't have any more work to do. In the meantime, the weeds are growing. So it was really it was a bountiful year for our crops and a bountiful year for a lot of weeds. So
Wouldn't that be ideal if you could put your plants in the ground and then your work was done?
it'd be just
That
perfect.
would be just perfect.
But you know, with this moisture and this continuous moisture, we did see quite a bit of the way of nutrient deficiencies. Here's squash with blossom end rot, calcium deficiency, but we saw quite a bit of that. Some of the water-soluble nutrients were obviously being flushed through the soil, so we did see some of that you had to be alert to and constantly replacing.
This season resulted in a great apple crop as well.
I think so. You know, one thing that
Looks like it.
Yeah, one thing that was really encouraging is we seem to have a lot of pollinator activity. Our honey producers had a good year, so that I find very encouraging. All the good things people are doing to try to plant flowers that attract the honeybee population and other pollinators. That was very, very great. And the apple crop was a result of some of that.
Well, and I think what you talked about a little bit with really seeing sort of a delay in the apple crop, having just been out in Bayfield yesterday talking with some apple growers, they are really experiencing kind of a delayed maturity of that fruit. So
Varieties that we might have actually harvested in early August, we're just harvesting now in this mid-September. So.
And one other point, we should have brilliant fall color.
I think so. All the maples, you know, we're setting up all these pigments that are masked by the green chlorophyll. So there's all those great purples and reds and oranges underneath that layer of chlorophyll. And that should be spectacular this year.
Okay. Well, here's an example of a lot of the spectacular color and what was grown this season in, potatoes, gourds, pumpkins, and tons of color in the tomatoes as well.
Yeah, these weren't Photoshopped. This is the real deal. The colors
just
were
us were photoshopped.
They had to work on us. The vegetables can hold their own.
Their own, yeah.
They look really good. Well, as always the case, though, there were some issues with a couple of things, one of them being the vine crops.
Once again, we had quite a bit of early vegetative growth. There was a little bit of delay in fruit set, and we're beginning to see more fungal disease, which is a consequence of this continuous moisture that we had here. So there was quite a bit of powdery mildew, not just on vine crops, but I'm sure you saw it on Monarda and other vegetative perennials.
Yeah, really, the powdery mildew, and lots of folks are seeing it on almost everything, whether it's vegetables or flowers, shrubs, trees, everything's being knocked down by it right now, or a lot of things are being knocked down by it right now.
Okay.
Overall, we had a great tomato year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think most people would agree it's a great tomato year, but as we indicate here, there was selective disease pressure. It was very, very interesting because early blight came very late. And actually, late blight and early blight are different types of fungi, and we rarely have late blight, which is devastating, so we're fortunate. We have a lot of early blight, but the early blight set in hard later in the year, so it's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, despite those problems with tomatoes that we saw there, we have some beautiful ones here. And look at the variety you brought in.
These are the heirlooms. They're kind of fun. Tomatoes like this green sausage, which is great, and we've got...
green sausage.
That's actually what that one's called. And here's Kellogg's breakfast. I'm not so sure what the Kellogg's
looks
people
like a
think about that.
cornflake, maybe. That's
not
why.
Not so sure if that was trademarked, but some of the great names that go along with some of these varieties. Brandywine, of course.
Tom, you have a couple of the more traditional, but boy, you got some nice size with those.
Yeah, and I had a nice crop of tomatoes, both in the community garden that I help maintain, and also in my home garden. Lots of variety. These are big beef, and they really did well this year, and you can just feel the very soft, almost perfect slicing, and I had Hungarian Oxheart tomatoes that did well as well. So, and lots of Sun Gold too. So,
Sun Gold, one of the
Sun
better
Gold,
eating.
show us one of those.
Yeah, we looked at both Sun Gold and Sun Sugar, and people may be asking that question. So this is an on-the-air taste test. Tom,
Okay, I'm going to have you hold it for the camera.
Okay,
and then I'll
Tom.
just reach in and grab one.
Tom got
and I'll take the rest.
now you get to take from the second bin there. You got
Okay.
You got to tell me.
Oh, wait, now you gotta keep, yeah, you
Okay.
gotta keep it still or the camera's not gonna get a shot of
Easy.
that. Okay.
Of that super satisfaction.
I better do that again.
That's what I thought.
This one is, they're both delicious.
Okay, this
but
one
the,
is, see what I'm pointing at here? Which is
Yes.
this one?
They look the same. That one is Sun Sugar.
And this one
And
is?
this is Sun Gold. And many
Okay,
people
and
really think.
which would you like better, Tom?
I like the Sun Sugar better. They're both delicious, but
Okay.
I really think Sun Sugar is coming on. I do think Sun Gold is perhaps a little bit more prolific. Both are indeterminate, great big vines, and this year they produced a lot of fruit.
All right.
So maybe at the break, or maybe now you'd like to.
Well,
give us your
I'll
opinion.
take one in a minute. I have a few things to say. I don't
I'll
want my
take the
mouth to be full. Well, the gorgeous green growth on trees and shrubs was very apparent at a garden we toured in Ashland, where homeowners of a large property they've had for 40 years began gardening in earnest in retirement.
Hey, I'm Paul, and this is Sandy,
I'm Sandy. We're from the
Ashland.
Ashland area.
8 miles from Ashland, south of Ashland, and we've been living here for 43 years.
Time
And we've
has
been
gone fast.
working on the yard for, since we retired, that's 15 years we've been doing this. We even trim all the trees, them evergreens along there, we trim them every year. The ones along the highway over there, we planted them over 40 years ago, my dad and I. And when we first got them, they were about 2 to 3 feet tall. And now, there's the ones we didn't trim, and they're what, 30, 40 feet tall? We used to use a hand machete to trim them trees.
The irises here are happy this year with the more moisture. We've got the Saturday Night Live iris. We've got the some Siberian iris. These green trees here are the spring snow malice or crabapple. The variety of the peonies here is called the Takara, the treasure. It's a cross between an intersectional and a tree peony. Paul loves his weather vanes, and I think every one of them has a different bird on top of it. There's the heron and the duck, and we have actually even a white-tailed deer. Every gazebo's got a weather vane.
How many gazebos do you have?
Six at least.
We put in this walkway about 3 years or so ago. The May night salvia we planted last year. It likes a little more moisture, so it's doing well this year. We planted the Madonna crab apples on this little raised bed. Had a lot of stones and rocks right in our wooded area that we wanted to put to use.
All the stones you see here are local. And that's where we put the falls. You look at it, it's a little blue. She said it's too bluish, but I kind of like it that way.
We're both from the farm, originally grew up on farms, so we like our chickens. There's the upright fine line buckthorn. Here's a Korean maple. Newest addition to the family, this is our twisty baby locust. We had not seen before, and they were a real pretty lime green, which caught our eye. The columnar Norway maple, and it just naturally grows that way. This is a variegated maple, and it's probably 5 years now that we've had it growing here. These are the river birch, pagoda dogwood that blooms in the spring, and it's just about finished blooming now. And it's an understory for the tall maples. We visit a lot of the nurseries often.
I'm anxious to see more of that, aren't
Yeah.
you? Although we were lucky enough to see it in person.
it was amazing. Paul and Sandy, such gracious gardeners.
Wonderful.
And if you recall, close to frost the day we were there that evening, remember they had some of their annuals covered and things like that.
But when we went back with the cameras, it was a gorgeous day. And as you said, the key for them is that heavy equipment they have for all, for all the pruning they do. Well, we'll have more from them coming up, but just piles of questions coming in, so let's get to those. Clint from Virginia says his neighbor had black rot for 3 years on Valiant grapes. Now he has it on his. What can he do about that?
You know, it's the biggest problem we have, I think, with the grapes is because of this high humidity and all the moisture. It's fungal disease. So you're really going to have to take a look at some type of a protectant on there. You can start with sulfur and Bordeaux mix, and then there are other approved fungicides if you really want to get it under control. I don't think we have any other way to do it. That's why most grape growing regions are really hot and dry during the summer, typically irrigated, but the foliage staying dry. We don't have those conditions.
David in Pike Lake wants to know, just another grape question, so you can answer to that as well, Tom, but he has grapes that haven't been pruned for a long time and is wondering how far back can I cut them?
You can really cut them way back. I had grapevines in my yard that were probably 25 feet long, and I took them down to about 3 feet this past spring, and now they're 15 feet long again.
Wow,
so
they grow that fast.
Yeah, so you can take them way back and really do some training with them and directing them, which I hadn't done in the past. So now it creates that opportunity. Late in the late winter is probably best time to do it.
Is it? Okay. David also wants to know, can he transplant peonies now? Should he cut them back? And how long can he transplant them? I'm assuming that means from year to year?
Yeah, really, we're in that ideal time to do it. Peony is a fall transplant or a fall division perennial, and he wants to do that probably within the next 3 weeks or so, and really he can cut it back anytime as well. So
The big thing, Tom, we got to remind people that are moving transplants is don't get those buds too deep. Take 2 fingers, and that's where that uppermost bud that's how deep it should be in the soil.
Right. Yeah, because really if you look at it, the growth is already formed for next year on the peony root. So when he plants that, as Bob mentioned, make sure that when you see the new growth points, those are no farther than about 1 inch deep in the soil.
Okay. Phil from Proctor wants to know, what causes a circle of small mushrooms growing in my grass and how do I treat them? Well, I tell you, I've seen mushrooms everywhere in every shape and size and color almost.
Good year for mushrooms.
Yeah.
You know, that's very common. That's fairy ring. And mushrooms are saprophytes, meaning they don't make their own food, unlike green plants, so they have to live on decaying material. So the key really is no chemicals other than a little bit more fertility. Try to accelerate the decay process and break down the woody material, the organic material, a little more high nitrogen fertilizer. The added benefit is the grass is going to grow better for you too.
Okay. Gail from Woodland wants to know, how do I dry my vanilla strawberry hydrangea blooms and will they be damaged by frost?
Really, she can cut those now, or as they start to develop that color. Very easy to do. She can cut them, bundle them, hang them in the garage or a dry place, let them dry for a couple of weeks, and they'll be good all winter, keeping some of that color. But she wants to do that before heavy frost.
Okay, that reminds me, Bob, Karen from Duluth had written in previously and said she took your advice, planted a strawberry vanilla hydrangea in place of her endless summer that never bloomed in over 4 years, has seen the strawberry vanilla bloom for 3 years, named it after you.
That's a first.
Strawberry Vanilla Bob.
I thought it was Strawberry Olin.
Okay. Nancy from Babbitt wants to know, when can I transplant sedum?
Really, sedum you can almost transplant any time, but certainly fall is a great time to be doing those perennials that she wants to move. So.
And she also wondering about when I can divide my peonies. We just talked about that. Julie from Poplar wants to know, can you grow a mandevilla vine in the house after growing it outside all summer?
You can, pretty easy to do, lots of sun, cut back on the water, cut back on fertilizer, about half strength on fertilizer once a month, and also watch for spider mites. Big problem with those in our dry conditions in the winter time. So.
Sure.
So.
And Tom, you make such a good point. If you're bringing them in, you'll bring those spider mites in, so be really careful that you inspect carefully and don't bring in any unwanted livestock. The bugs, hose them down if you can with real tempered water, and that should be a bare minimum for most of these plants that we're going to bring in. And a lot of people will be bringing them in soon as when the frost warnings come up.
Okay, great. A lot of good questions here, but we're going to have to save some and move on right now. As you know, it's the year of the potato in the Twin Ports. We've heard a lot about the spud, and there's more. Here's Bob on some local potato trials.
As you can tell, it's been really an extraordinary year for growing potatoes. This is our varietal trial here, where we've got 9 different types of potatoes. They all flower just a little differently. Generally, as a rule of thumb, when the plant is beginning to flower, it's also beginning to set its tubers. We've managed the moisture, and that's been real easy to do this year because we've had adequate rainfall, but we also are careful to manage the nutrition, and they're growing very large plants, so they do require quite a bit of fertility to do a good job and to maximize your yields. We've got a number of different growing techniques. This row right here, we actually trenched out, put the seed pieces in the bottom of the trench, and then have been adding and filling soil and then hilling as we worked our way up. And then the first row, which is now covered with straw, those seed pieces were just laid on the soil surface, and then we covered with straw, and as the stems began to elongate, we just added straw. In all cases with potatoes, whether we're hilling in a conventional sense or whether we're adding straw or other types of covering material, we want to force the elongation of the stem, and the longer the stem, the greater the likelihood that you're going to get additional tuber foundation formation, and you'll get higher yields. This is our applied research on different types of container growing systems as well as different types of soil mixes. Obviously, and I'll just show you this one where we're not getting the quality plant growth, even though some people may use this kind of a mix for potting soil, we're not going to get very good yields if we don't get a nice growth on the top. And in some of these situations where the mix isn't really adequate, you can see the nutrient deficiencies that are beginning to develop. And then a mix which I put together specifically for potato production, where you need nitrogen, phosphorus, and in particular potassium. We obviously have got good vigorous growth here, nice lush green color, and hopefully we're going to get some real adequate yields from this. So we're trying different techniques, many of which would be applicable to small space gardens. We've got some cylinders here that we've been working with that are just lined with poly bags. Started with the tuber at the bottom, the seed piece, and have been adding soil as we've pushed the stem up. This is a technique that's been around for many, many years. It's probably a good use of abandoned tires, but we get started with the tire right at the bottom and just put the seed piece in there, covered it with about 2 inches of soil. And then again, as the stem emerged, we just let it grow and kept adding another row of tires. And this is about ready for another one. So the whole concept is to try to push that stem as high as you can as it tries to seek light, and you'll get tubers that will set along that stem. The nice thing about all of these systems is you're not going to be doing a lot of digging at the time of harvest. You're either going to be able to spill a container over, slit a bag open, or take the tires off this pyramid of tires that we're building, and harvest should be very easy to accomplish. All of these systems we're going to be taking apart, and we're actually going to be determining what the yield actually is, both count as well as the weight of the tubers that are being produced.
So all of those results from the trial will be put together in some information that we'll get out to people before planting time. We'll have it posted on our website eventually.
Great, and I really want to take the opportunity to thank all the St. Louis County Master Gardeners that helped us. We collect lots of data and lots of numbers, and we'll crunch them all, and we'll give people some of the results.
Okay, all right. Got some nice potatoes here as well. Just to mention briefly that lots of variety this year, and probably the ones that, or the method that worked best was just the typical.
It's very interesting. We looked at a lot of different ways of growing them, and actually some of the conventional methods turned out to be very, very successful. Great year for potatoes because of the uniform moisture we talked about and the adequate sunlight, and boy, these are all nice and solid. There's very little hollow heart. Very little Colorado potato beetle, which is really a result of the fact that we had a cold winter without a lot of cover. So that destroyed a lot of the larvae. So it was really excellent.
It has been truly the year of the potato.
It has been the year of the potato, although we do want to tell you about one method many people have been curious about, and that's planting potatoes in stacked tires. Well, here's a look at those results.
Oops, don't do anything dangerous. Let's see here. Well, like I say, I'm not completely convinced how effort-free these systems are. This has been a method that's been used forever. Look at this yield. I think it was such a wet year. This yield is
Suppose it stays
pathetic.
in the
Look at that.
nothing.
Totally disappointing. A very, very wet year, and we kept filling these up. There's no place for the water to go, and we had a firm base here, even though we had drainage in the bottom. Look at what we got in terms of stem. This is not root tissue. This is stem tissue all the way down. And yet we just got more and more elongated stems and no tuber set. So why do we grow these in tires?
It didn't work that time very well, did it?
No, and there's always explanations. This is why, what's the old expression, trust but verify. Everything you read on the internet doesn't necessarily work that well for you. So we may examine that again and take another look. It may have been the season, it may have been our technique, but certainly didn't quite meet up our expectations.
And the other thing was it wasn't necessarily that easy to dump it either. I mean, as it might have been to dig.
Was that me?
No offense, Bob.
You looked winded, Bob.
Yeah, there's only about 300 pounds of soil there.
I know. All right. Well, it's interesting, and we're anxious to see more results on the potato trials. So thanks for that, Bob. And again, thanks to the Master Gardeners as well. Let's get to some more questions. Larry in Hermantown wants to know, when is the ideal time to prune an apple tree?
The ideal time is when that tree is dormant. When you're most uncomfortable is probably the best time in the middle of the winter to prune that tree, or very, very late winter, early spring would be ideal. We just don't want to prune during the growing season because we're really concerned about fire blight, and those spores are in the air right now. So you got to wait a little longer. Okay. The leaves should at least be down and off, and the tree should be dormant.
Okay. Speaking of fruit trees, here is a banana tree we got a picture of. And it's from Mark in Duluth. Says he planted what was called a cold hardy Zone 4 banana tree from what he said was a seedling in a large pot this past spring, and is wondering about wintering it over.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Have you seen one of those?
Yeah.
Cold hardy
banana
tree from a seedling, Tom.
Yeah. Yeah, more than likely, almost without uncertainty, it isn't hardy in Zone 4 or for our region. If he wants to overwinter it, similar to what we talked about with the bougainvillea and other plants that folks have growing in containers, he'll want to move it in before frost hits it, and get it in a sunny, bright window, cut back on the watering a little bit, and watch those pests very closely. So if he wanted to try to overwinter it, he'd have to turn it on its side, similar to a Minnesota tip method for roses, and cover it with a tremendous amount of leaves and hope for the best, but more than likely, even in that case, wouldn't survive. So.
All right.
And of course, while we were chuckling, they're really not seedlings because the banana doesn't have seeds any longer. They've diminished with time, and these are all cuttings, vegetative cuttings that have been taken.
Okay.
But it certainly is beautiful.
And he did a nice job growing it out.
Nice
That shows you
tree.
the warm season we had, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Tom from Washburn wants to know when is the best time to remove a dahlia tuber, before or after the frost?
Really, he can do it after the frost isn't going to hurt the tuber, so he can wait and enjoy those blooms. They're still producing lots of flowers and looking great in Washburn, lots of flowers. So wait till after the frost. It's not going to hurt it, but certainly before the ground starts to freeze up. So.
Okay. Cindy in Hermantown wants to know what causes a white ring on tomatoes when they're still green, and then slows the ripening and stays even after they ripen.
You know, we've talked about how great a year it was for tomatoes, but we've seen a number of deficiencies that have occurred. And, you know, that sometimes we don't get complete fertilization of the seeds. So we see some portions, irregularities in the outer surface, and if she'd cut into that tuber, or into that tomato rather, we'd get a little better idea of just what may have occurred there. It's a problem with the way that the fertilization occurred and the manner in which that particular tomato grew.
Okay. Mary Lou in Hibbing says, and back to the issue we talked about earlier, it's on powdery mildew. She gets it every year. Spraying doesn't help. Is there a soil treatment? What can she do?
Best thing she can do is look for powdery mildew resistant varieties. Now, if in fact our season is warming up a bit, powdery mildew has been a problem on vine crops in the south for a long time, which I guess is good because there are a number of introductions which really are resistant to this disease. Resistance is really about the only thing she's going to be able to do. there are no soil treatments, and topical applications just aren't going to be effective either.
It's everywhere. Unfortunately, those spores are. And like Bob mentioned, looking for resistant varieties, whether it's bee balm or hollyhocks or lilacs or whatever it happens to be, look for those varieties that say mildew resistant.
And some of the pumpkins and vine crops now they're introducing
And will it
resistant
spread
varieties.
from plant to plant in a bed?
Quite readily.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So get it out of there.
Yeah.
All right.
It's always a good idea to dispose of, and we'll talk about this maybe a little later in fall cleanup, but dispose of all of that tissue because that's loaded with the spores, which again it will inoculate any plant material next year. So get it off site or get it deep into your compost pile.
Okay. All right. More questions coming up later. But right now, we want to talk about the beauty of this season, which is extended, of course, with good weather. But appropriate plantings will also prolong it. Here are some examples.
Our very large fall planters in the whiskey barrels contain some tall grasses. They contain some tall Denver daisies, Rudbeckia, Denver daisy. Ornamental cabbage or kale, which get beautiful and big. Also, some of the bright light Swiss chard, which has different colored stems, and they get huge leaves, and they'll get a reddish tinge depending on the sun, so they're beautiful throughout the season. As those plants get colder and colder, they get better in color. The lobularia, or alyssum on steroids is what lobularia is. It gets very large, very colorful. They all will tolerate the cold. These are another Rudbeckia called cherry brandy, and then there are some blue salvia, the Farinacea type salvias like Victoria, and then this is a fountain grass. This is a decorative oregano called Kent's Beauty. These are actually bracts of color, and they're just gorgeous, and they just stay nice through the whole season. The gold puffy stuff you see on there is their flower. Now as those drop off, the gold balls will form all over those flower stems, and then they will be the little millet that the birds like. So it'll feed birds later in the season. Here's a little helichrysum icicles. Another hardy, cold tolerant one. And Dusty Miller also will take the cold if you want a silver accent. It works great with this blue. Here's some Swiss chards that bolted. And at first we didn't like it, but we left it in because it was just kind of interesting. This is such a sweet little planter in a basket with some of the peacock red kale, which is real feathery looking. Some asters that'll just continue to bloom all through the fall season. Some little pansies that'll continue to bloom. Tiger eye Rudbeckia again. Beautiful little combination that's not overbearing at all.
Swanson's is still open until the end of October. That's Swanson Greenhouses where we tape that tip. They have things like these Minnesota Hardy Mums that are going to last for a while. I got those there. A lot of the greenhouses have mums and other things that are still going to have bloom.
And Gail made a great point about planting. You know, she put it in, wasn't sure what she was going to get, wasn't sure if she'd like it with the Swiss chard, but turns out they like it. And that's really what gardening is all about, is it's our own personal expression in the garden. So
I think Gail does a beautiful job in terms of composition, and even those of us that have that side of the brain to develop, the artistic side, can at least appreciate the nice work that she's done there.
Yeah. Right. And still a good time to do some planting, Tom.
Oh yeah, really, fall is a great time to be getting those trees and shrubs in the garden. So if you were looking at your garden or your landscape and things didn't do well, or you want to add something to it, this is a great time to do it. A little easier to keep the moisture to it as it sort of starts to go into its dormancy and things like that, but certainly a great time to do it. So.
Evergreen and deciduous trees
Sure.
can go in now?
Right now. The one thing you don't want to go too early on would be some of the spring fall flowering bulbs.
Yep.
I mean, soils are still very warm, and you want to delay a little bit just so they don't emerge before we this fall. We want them to sit there and get a start. but
So
then
those
emerge in
bulbs
spring.
should go in closer to
In
November, October, when it gets a
Probably
little cooler.
mid-October, maybe the 10th of October, Columbus Day kind of on for bulb planting. So.
Okay, great. All right, well, right now we want to take you back to that fabulous, vast landscape in Ashland, where a retired couple has made gardening their passion.
Maple trees, we got about 100 of them. Yellow, red, you name it. Anything we see that we can, it's different.
Crimson king maples, the autumn, and then the golden Norway maples. It is a beautiful sight in the fall. These Redmonds, when they bloom the white flower, it has an aroma of sweet clover. It's a form of basswood. The Taylor sunburst pine is up on our berm there. It's the green, real green needles, and the new growth turns yellow on the tips. And then we had a little bunny house in the winter time.
We feed them and everything.
And this tree here, it's a mound blue spruce, a larch, a weeping larch. And this little guy we've had in here for quite some time. We keep them trimmed. Any of the new growth that shoots up, we try to keep in check so that it keeps more of the weeping downward form to it. And the trees on the side are the shamrock lindens, and these also bloom. They have pretty white flowers. This weeping tree is a weeping pea shrub and a carragana weeping tree. And the one in the middle there is also a carragana weeping tree, but it's a little bit of a finer leaf. And the weeping tree in back of it is a mulberry, a weeping mulberry. As far as the amount of variety, when we go to a garden center, if we like a tree or shrub, what we do is do a little research, and we usually find a spot for it. We put a lot of the raised beds in because the soil was so sandy and it would have taken so much amendment. These are the sunburst locusts, these three yellow, and the new growth is the bright yellow. It's just a beautiful sight in the spring. We enjoy the cheeriness of the trees.
They had a couple just like that, and they were selling them. And I thought they were asking like 400 or more for them. And I told San, I said, geez, I could make them real easy. If you can do a lot of stuff yourself, you can save a lot of money.
He's done most all of the...
Well, like these blocks here, we put all these in.
Where does this great work ethic come from?
Farmers. When we were younger, we grew up as farmers. I believe that has a lot to do with it. Well, when it gets real warm, when it gets real hot out, when we have like the 80, 90 degrees, Paul and our favorite spot is over on the swing here in the shaded area. It's not too often that we do sit. We're usually out working in the yard, but on occasion, towards the end of the day, if it's real warm outside, it's cool on the swings over in the shaded area.
Pretty incredible what Sandy and Paul have done.
Yeah, isn't that true? We as gardeners create these areas for us to sit in our garden, but we never sit in them because we're too busy working in the garden.
Right.
But it's the kind of thing it's healthy work, and as you said,
absolutely.
11 years retired, that's a real
No,
activity.
15 years they've
15
been retired.
Years. Wow,
yeah.
amazing.
And they've done beautiful things with the yard.
Staying
Thank you
active,
again
yeah.
for sharing that tour with us. Okay, let's get to more questions from our viewers. Jack in Duluth called in to ask, what's the best way to prop up hollyhocks?
Well, there's plant stakes or even twine, and seeing a lot of that, and really a product of what we talked about earlier, a lot of growth during the season because of adequate moisture, adequate sunlight, and the hollyhocks got really leggy, especially if they were reaching for the sun. So seeing a lot of them that are tipping over.
A lot of people grow them up against a fence or a gate.
And do that.
And you can tie them or some
I've
kind
tied
of
mine
support,
with twine.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we're going to have to get used to these heavier rains, because we have had some pretty intense rainfall. This morning, as an example, 2 inches in about 45 minutes or something.
I think we talked about this before, but my hollyhocks have a lot of rust on them, on the leaves.
Yeah, once again, That's just a function of the moist conditions that we've had. There's very little. That's one of the downfalls of hollyhock, and we really don't have good control. Clean everything up at the end of the year, of course.
And they'll be better next year.
Hopefully.
Okay.
Maybe hot and dry. Not like California.
I can't hold you to that.
Maybe not.
Okay. Ron from Duluth wants to know, how do I mix ammonia to kill weeds in the cracks of the sidewalk? Have you heard of that?
I'm sure that, you know, if you just use the household ammonia, if you decided to do that as such, just a strong solution would probably do it. But there are any number of household products that might do it as well. The problem is it just burns the top off and typically doesn't burn the root. The other problem with using ammonia is that will gradually be converted to nitrogen, so you get a burn down, but then you've kind of replenished the root with a little nitrogen, so you're going to get it to come back again.
And he may actually be thinking of vinegar.
Could be. Vinegar
I've
might
tried
use it.
vinegar. Doesn't work very well.
Well, and if you do, it's like a 10-to-1 solution, and it just burns the tops off.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it does.
I've tried it on my weeds and they came back. But
Yeah.
You can dig it out, or there are some other compounds that can be
yeah.
used.
It's tough in those cracks in the sidewalk to get at those weeds. Bernice from Floodwood has raspberry canes. She said they're for next year, have grown over 6 feet tall. Can I cut them down shorter? How short can I cut them and when?
You know, she can, if she really wants to. The problem is when you cut them in the fall, we're always going to get a little tip burn depending on what the winter season is, and then you're going to have to cut them farther down to green tissue next spring. So I generally advise that people let them grow out through the winter and then assess the situation in the spring and then cut them back to vegetative growth. So cutting in the spring is probably the better option.
Yeah, it's really not going to hurt anything, isn't that right,
No,
Bown?
if you keep cutting them down, you lose fruiting nodes is a problem, so your yield goes down. So you're better off just cutting them in the spring, cut what you need to in the spring.
Yep.
All right. Smirk.
I knew that was there.
Irene from Silver Bay says, with a new perennial bed, should I mulch them for the winter?
It's a good idea too, certainly, and mulch in general is a good way to not only control the moisture, it's also a good layer of protection and a good weed suppressant. So all good things, especially if she doesn't have a lot of time to work in the garden. So.
Okay, great. All right, well, we're going to move on to another bulb. We mentioned fall flower bulbs to get in the ground, but there's another popular pungent crop that is just now ripe for planting.
We planted probably about 8 different garlic varieties. This one's Georgian Fire, and it's a hardneck garlic, so grows really well in this area and stores well. And this is from seed garlic that Marion has grown out here in Duluth for a number of years, and so it's already been adapted here. We grow it and we select the ones, which is what people have been doing for centuries, select the ones that did really well and save those, and so you replant those the next year, and then over time you've got this crop that you know does well and is resistant to whatever particular challenges we experience here. Instead of saving the seeds from it, you're actually saving pieces of the garlic, or it would be the same thing with seed potatoes where you're actually planting a piece of the plant again. You want to pick your strongest, not necessarily the biggest, but the one that is strong and good, and replant those, and the rest you can eat and enjoy. Garlic isn't prone to too many pests. There is a garlic bloat nematode that can cause a lot of problems, and we've had our garlic tested for that to make sure that we didn't have it. Garlic actually grows really well in this area. Here in our climate, we plant the garlic in October. What you're aiming for is you want to do it when it's cold and the ground is going to freeze soon enough that the plants have a chance to put out roots, but they're not wanting to send up the plant yet, because you want it to get a root system and you want it to just go dormant over the winter and be strong and ready to come up in the spring.
We make raised beds, and I make them wide enough so I can get about 5 across, 6 inches. So a 36-inch bed, we can get 5 across. And the pointy end up, you can see where the roots were. It's got that scar at the bottom, that goes down. And I plant as far down as I can push my thumb. And I push down as far as I can go. I can still see the top in there. And then cover them up and mulch them with straw or shredded leaves.
Oh, in about June, early July, it starts sending up a flower stalk, and it's called a garlic scape, and they look like these little green pigtails that come out. You snap them off and you can put them in stir fry, or you can make pesto with them. It can taste kind of like a cross between a green bean and asparagus with a little bit of a garlicky bite. They're delicious, but you want to pick those off so that the plant is putting its energy into making the garlic bulbs for you. We harvested these the first week in August, but when there are about 5 green leaves left and the rest have yellowed, is a good time to dig them up.
When you harvest this garlic, you do not pull it out of the ground. You dig next to the plant deeply with a fork and you lift it out of the ground. Hang it to dry for 3 weeks or a month out of the sun in a nice airy place, and cut the tops off and cut off most of the roots. Brush off the dirt and you're ready to go again.
Okay, well, the seed garlic sale and fundraiser is going on right now. You can go to duluthcommunitygarden.org, go to their website to find out more. Well, it's pretty amazing how many people across the Northland are excited about gardening. Here now are some of the pictures they've sent in to share. The English primroses were outstanding this spring in the gardens of Mary Durocher Hudson in Washburn, Wisconsin. Mary doesn't know where the red ones came from, but suddenly she says, ta-da, there they were, a gift. Nellie Scheffler and Greg Bown have a 20-year-old Rosy Lights azalea that's 8 feet tall and still growing. Rosie stands out along what they call Azalea Alley, which runs down their Rice Lake Township driveway. Susan Thompson planted these brilliant hollyhocks 8 years ago, and they keep coming back as sweet reminders of her time as a child with her grandmother. From Dennis Lampkin of Duluth, the latest rendition of his architectural gardens with Emerald Isle boxwoods around Artemisia, and Dusty Miller enclosing the display. A nearby assemblage holds perennial blue mondo grass with more Artemisia to carry the blue-gray tones across the yard. Bill and Noreen Doring of Hayward, Wisconsin never knew when they planted this patio tomato plant to keep on their deck that it would reach 11 feet tall. As of mid-August, it produced more than 200 tomatoes. Nice size crop. Kelly Ritter Spahn of Duluth calls this monarch larva the very hungry caterpillar. Kelly's colorful container includes assorted shades of purple and blue among the sweet potato vine. This vining plant from Betty Tolan of Duluth is not a favorite. It's one of the countless creeping Charlie plants she pulls from the yard by the wagonful. And lastly, Amber Hartl of Grand Rapids, Minnesota captured images of insects alight on individual flowers, the dew on the leaves and petals of this poppy, her garden trellis of daylilies offset by purple morning glories, and this morning glory blossom backlit by the sun. Have your own image of a garden beauty you'd like to share? Email the photo to greatgardening@wdse.org or send pictures by post to 632 Niagara Court, Duluth. You guys like those pictures,
Wow.
didn't you?
Wow,
Yeah.
beautiful gardens and beautiful photography.
Let's see them
Exactly.
again.
So be sure to keep those pictures coming. We always want a store of them for future shows. You can find all the photos we've featured in our online garden gallery, so look for those throughout the year as well. Okay, time for some more questions. We've got some interesting ones. Is it a good idea to mow raspberries to the ground? That's from Kathy and Proctor.
You know, it's kind of interesting because the fall crops are typically just mown, and all we do is harvest the primocane, the first cane. But for most people, you're not going to be able to do that because you're mowing off next year's fruit crop. So you selectively have to take out those canes that bore fruit this year and leave the vegetative canes so you get a crop for next year. So no, you typically in this area cannot just mow them.
Okay. Do you know what zoysia grass is? Zoysia grass. Karen in Duluth says she's in zone 4B and wants to try it. Will it work?
Yeah, it certainly will grow. Zoysia is like a Bermuda. It's a wide bladed grass, and all the ads promote the fact that it will grow in this area. It will grow, but it just won't grow through the winter.
Okay.
So if you like to plant your lawn every spring, it might be an option.
So it's an annual.
It's a, yeah, not
For us,
hardy.
it's an annual, not hardy. Yeah.
All right. Gail in Woodland wants to know what's the best way to bring in geraniums for the winter?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to do that, and probably each of us has our own that work, but certainly bring them in before a heavy frost, getting them into sunlight. You can cut them back a little bit and then cut back on the water is one way to do it, and grow them actively right in your sunniest spots in the house. So.
Yeah,
that works for me.
That will work. If you want to bring them in and keep them growing, find the sun, cut them back maybe in February.
March.
Or you can just pop them out. If you've got a root cellar, high humidity, you can actually take them out of the pot and you hang them upside down.
That's the way my mom's done it, and that's worked as well.
For years you can do that, but a lot of our heated basements, it doesn't work very well. So you have to have moist, cool conditions for that to really be effective.
Okay.
So there are a bunch of different ways
Lots
to do
of
it.
ways to do it. And of course, another way, and I usually tell people that it's often a good idea to buy some new geraniums
Buy new ones.
every spring. I'm
They're
sure
always beautiful in the spring.
Our sponsors appreciate
in
that.
our local greenhouses,
And then
yes.
yours that you overwinter will bloom a little later.
Okay. Jim in Woodland wants to know when to divide bleeding hearts, and also some roots are showing above the ground. Should something be done about that?
Bleeding heart is good to divide in the fall, so he can go in and do that. And certainly if through frost and other reasons that root has lifted up, get that back down into the soil. But right now he can go in, if they already haven't died down, cut them down ground level and then divide it out into big chunks, and they'll be fine.
Lois from Duluth has a 35-year-old red maple with a crack in the bark located by the ground facing south. The bark is peeling. Should we be concerned?
Yes.
Yeah, it obviously isn't a healthy condition, but what do you do about it? There's not much. The plant has to recover. I just tell people take a sharp X-Acto knife and try to keep the water from collecting there, and then it just has to heal on its own.
Okay, a couple questions we're not going to get to, but I have to ask this one from Colin in Duluth. I suspect I know this, Colin. What's the best wine to serve with venison that has fed on hostas all summer in Duluth?
Well,
Any wine.
Any wine
is
and
good
as
with
much
that
venison
venison.
as you can put in the pot.
All right, okay. All right, well, like it or not, 2016 is right around the corner, and before you know it, spring will arrive. That's when we at Great Gardening will return with all new shows. Here's a look ahead.
Next season on Great Gardening, there's something for all generations. We visit a first-year garden created by a young couple who transformed their entire yard into lush vegetable beds. A former school teacher shares her love of learning with grandchildren and neighbors in the backyard storybook garden she and her husband built as a retirement project. A tour of Monarch Way stations in Duluth reveals the plants and flowers that serve as breeding ground for those beautiful butterflies. Out in the little town of Holyoke, one woman has built up a daylily farm where you'll find a full array of northern hardy lilies in all styles and colors. And as always, we share spectacular tours of gardens from throughout the region and provide live expert advice on the gardening challenges going on in your own backyard. 2016 promises to be another great garden season.
All right, a lot of good things to come, but some work to be done yet this fall. Let's take a look at garden chores that we have. Of course, cut back those perennials. We mentioned get rid of the diseased foliage, keep things watered, rake, cover your tender shrubs and perennials, and then the trees, Tom, you mentioned
Yeah,
too.
you really want to wrap trees, especially the newly planted ones, for deer protection, rodent protection, stuff like that. And also your evergreens if you're worried about deer browse. So.
And fall lawn care, this is the ideal time. Control the weeds, overseed, don't cut it too short, a little fertility right now this time of year.
All right, the work is not done. And there are some upcoming events to talk about as well this fall that include a potato harvest. We're not done talking about potatoes. There's a potluck next week in Duluth Lincoln Park with the Duluth Community Garden Program. And then coming up in October, a potato fest that you're involved with, Bob.
Yeah, we're going to have a little potato salad contest, and we're going to have celebrities that enter the contest,
Yes.
including my good friend Mr. Gasper, and Pam's going to give it a try, perhaps.
sure.
I might throw it in. And B.O. Jakangas
I
is
love
going
potato salad.
Oh, great. We're competing against B.O.
Wait a minute, we didn't know that.
didn't know about that. She's going to be one of the instructors,
Oh.
and everyone's going to chance. She will also be one of the judges.
Oh, okay.
Everyone will get a chance to sample all of these as well.
Okay. Another great community event. They will be tipping the roses at Duluth Leaf Erickson Park, October 20th and the 24th. And for more details on all these and other events and appropriate links, go to our website, wdsc.org/gardening. You will also find past episodes of our program that you can watch. Well, that's about it. Any final thoughts for the fall and what you're going to do to relax this winter?
I'm going to have a beer.
Wine with the venison.
That's right.
No,
Okay.
I think people just have to pinch themselves to appreciate this great growing year we had and look ahead to 2016. I think it was spectacular and will continue to be into next year.
Yeah, and lots of great information from this show and for folks really to plan. And now is a great time to be thinking about what you're going to do next year and dream about what that garden's going to be.
All right. A big thank you to you guys. You are just a wealth of information, and we appreciate it so much. We want to also thank our phone volunteers from St. Louis County Master Gardeners. Thanks to them for coming in and manning the phones. And then, of course, to all of you who called in questions and all of you who tuned in to watch all season long, not just tonight. We want to thank you so very much. From all of us here at Great Gardening, enjoy the garden, have a happy winter. We'll see you in the spring.